there's some great stuff going on today, but we're going to chat about brand partnerships, and I think that's a really interesting part of our industry at the minute. So we'll start with introductions. So I'm Rees Hitchcock. I work at FRUKT. We're an agency that works with the likes of O2, MasterCard, Delta, Nando's, and basically finds their role and what they should be doing in the music industry. And my job personally, as a creative kind of strategist, is to tell them what they should be doing and justify why, which is no easy task. And an album that I've been listening to, because that's one thing I want all of these panellists to introduce with, is the new LP by Ravin Lenae. If you've not heard of it, it's a beautiful little soul album. So that's my bit, and I'll pass it to my left, to Bob.
I'm Bob Workman. I'm SVP of Music Partnerships at Warner Music. I'm not under 35, sadly, but I spend my life trying to keep fresh and understand. And yeah, I work at Warner. We have some of the most amazing artists in the world, but also, and most excitingly, we have some of the best new talent that we work with. The album I'm listening to most at the moment is War on Drugs.
Nice.
I'm Alex. Can everyone hear me? Yeah? I'm Alex, social media director and strategy director at an agency called Splendid. And we are a creative agency that works on lots of brands, from alcohol to food to retail. And over the years, we've been really involved in working with artists and labels and brands and bringing that together to create bits of culture. So that's why I'm here. And I guess the album, I've actually been going down a bit of a nostalgia trip recently. And I've been listening to Relationship of Command by At The Drive-In loads for some reason. So I don't know why.
How much is loads?
Once
Weird
a week
amount
for the last sort of 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah. It's old album too.
Sergio?
Hi, I'm Sergio. I'm a creative licensing manager at Ninja Tune and Just Isn't Music. My day-to-day job involves really kind of working our recording and publishing catalogue and finding sync opportunities, brand partnership opportunities for our wonderful artists and writers. And I also do some music supervision on the side, so I often on a daily basis wear sort of copyright hat and music supervisor hat at the same time. So the days are interesting. My left brain negotiates with my right brain. Album I'm playing at the moment, I've actually been playing to death the Bicep album that we recently released. Nice. It's been on the 1210s for the last few weeks.
Cool.
Hi, I'm Miranda Kempin. I'm from Sony ATV. I'm the sync licensing manager in the synchronization team, and I specifically deal with brand licensing. Keep it short and sweet. Can I have 2 albums?
You can have as many albums as you want.
Going rogue. So I always feel like I need to ease into the day. So in the morning, I've been listening to Ben Howard, Every Kingdom. That's
a great choice, personally.
It's good.
So we'll know how much I used to listen. It's at Live Nation. I used to put that on pretty much all day.
Great album. And it's not too loud, which is nice before 12. Post 12, which is my watershed, I've been listening to the new Nothing But Thieves album, Broken Machine, which incidentally we publish. So a little bit of plugging there.
That is a great... slide it in there. So brand partnerships, I think we could probably sit here and chat here all day about it, but we tried to break it down into kind of 3 kind of areas we want to discuss, and the first one is value. I think over the last decade or so, brands have really made that shift from side stage sponsorship to centre stage, and I think the way the music industry has changed and the way artists and talent get paid, and I think we're all firm believers in this room that talent should get paid for what they do. It's years of creativity and focus, and I don't think that should ever be undervalued. And if you look at in the US, for example, so brand sponsorship over the last 10 years has gone up 23%. Since 2010, it's gone up 23%. So brands are here probably more than ever. And I think we'd be naive to think that this is a new thing. I think any Rum DMC fans in the house or any Addy fans in the house will throw it back way back to when that was a thing. But I think that their role in the music industry has changed and how important brands have come has changed. So something with such a bullshit savvy audience, that's the first swear word, Chris, that brands have to add value more than ever in that artist area. So Bob, what I wanted to ask you first was, in this fragmented state of the music industry, just how are brand partnerships adding value?
Well, I think Alex mentioned the word culture. I think where brands can work with artists to create something that's cultural, I think that's where the real value comes. We actually segment all of the brands that we work with into little groups, and one of the groups we talk about is culture brands. Some of the brands you work with, in fact, and there's some of them quite obvious. The Red Bulls, the Addies of this world. those partners that we work with that are able to create a narrative, something that it might not necessarily be about music, frankly. Sure. I mean, we've just been working with Nike and Gorillas and Chelsea, and it's been about football. And in fact, sadly, there wasn't even any music licensed into that campaign, but it was about personality. It was obviously Gorillas and all that sort of recognition you get with Gorillas, and obviously rooted in some kind of truth, which is that Damon Albarn's a lifelong Chelsea supporter. But it was culture, because we created a load of films that proliferated across various social platforms, and there's high levels of engagement and conversation, and it's conversation you need and want, and particularly now with dark social and sort of messenger apps, and getting under the bonnet of those platforms is critical if you really want to reach people.
Yeah, I think you find in I'll say the state of the world at the minute, but with there's certain issues, and it's easier to see certain things. Do we think that brands are feeling like they've got to step up and have a bit more of a voice and have a bit more of a truth in the way that they activate, I suppose, ultimately? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I think there's so much more savvy behaviour now than there was last year, and certainly 5 years ago, and I think that's encouraging. I think it's very important that there are intermediaries, because I think we have to encourage the right kind of behaviour, and we have to bring the insights that we have about artists, about culture, about audience, because I think we're all a lot smarter about audience now than we were. So all of that has to inform the ideas, and we work really hard to encourage people to think beyond the idea of a song or a performance, because our artists are about so much more than that. They have so many other passions. Some of them are obviously just celebrities, but they're as much about fashion and football as they are about music.
Those lines are blurred as well, right? Because you're looking at music and sport, and I think traditionally there have been quite separated areas for brands to play in. And I think a lot of that is kind of coming together. If you look at like the NBA and the NFL, what they're doing over here as well as the US, but we're going to talk from a European perspective, is that they're bringing music and fashion and sport together under one thing, and for brands it kind of makes it easier in a way, because you can have more people in one group. But actually, as a brand manager, there might be some in here, is how do you separate that as a channel? It's quite an interesting challenge, which I don't think a few brands are cracked, but it's quite tough to do. So Miranda, one thing I wanted to touch on is, if you look at how distribution channels have changed for artists and the music industry in general over the years, what can artists look to brands to do to help? What do they expect in a brand to help them? Why do they want to get involved in brands?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I think we were talking about value earlier. They need to get some value from it. And I think, for me, that falls into three things. The first one being promotional. Particularly for some of our new writers, they like being involved in brand partnerships, because they can get their music out there to an audience that they may not reach otherwise. They can piggyback on the sort of marketing infrastructure of a brand, whether that be their socials or whether it's being involved in a sort of a merchandise sort of activation. The second one would be creativity. So it's not just about music now, like you were mentioning, the lines are blurred. And ultimately, a writer or an artist is at its core a creative person. It gives them scope to explore their personality in different ways. They can create merchandise, like I was saying before, a bespoke track. And in this world we live in now, which social media plays such a big part, it's about creating that image, and getting involved with the brand partnership allows a writer and an artist to curate their own image alongside a brand. And a third one, which obviously I have to mention, is financial. Yeah. And I think sometimes this is actually, from a publishing perspective, where it falls down for us sometimes. But I'm sure we'll get to that later. So obviously it's another way of getting revenue from the music they make. So I think those are the three main things for me that I know our writers look for in a brand.
Yeah, I think you can't swerve the revenue aspect of it, but it's a way of more transparency probably is going to be needed, I think, at some level. Just the way the whole world is moving, but transparency coming back down to how artists work with brands is probably going to be quite an important theme, I think, moving forward. And then flipping that on its head, actually, why are brands getting involved with music artists?
Well, I feel like they need to brands need to realise that what artists and writers give them is access to a whole new enthusiastic audience, and they can access that in an authentic way, which is something that sometimes direct advertising can't do. It allows the consumer to look at a product and have that sort of life aspiration, and I think music is a great, natural, authentic way to do that. A way that I don't think they can do it in any other way, and it's authentic.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, again, looking at the size of some of the followers that brands have, and you compare that to some of the majors, actually that is a whole new distribution channel, a new audience, which they probably maybe not touched on before. And like, something I wanted to touch on is quite important to, I think, a lot of us in this room. Something that often gets overlooked on not just panels like this, but I think industry-wide, is actually what does all this mean for the fan? Because, we talk a lot about brands and artists and platforms and the likes of, Spotify and distribution channels, but actually as a music fan, what's the benefit for them for all of these, some of the great partnerships that's going on?
Well, so I think, again, it comes back to the word value, right? So we see more advertising messages and consumer messages and buy this, do this. We're instructed so much more than we ever have been before by brands to do stuff, and some better than others. But I think when you're able to tap into that cross-section of music, fashion, art, culture, because you're right, it's not just music, it's what it represents.
Yeah.
You look at Levi's Skepta, what that represented, that was as much about the music as the location and the origin and the story and the fashion and the art. It was a really best-in-class cross-section of all those things. Yeah. So when you've got all this content and all these messages being pumped at you, to see an artist you like or a brand that you like do something different but is authentic and is true to the brand's ethics and ethos, it doesn't feel knee-jerk and for the sake of selling more, whatever. If it feels real and it feels authentic, and you do it with an artist that you like, it can open up a whole other world of discovery for you, right? So you could go to an event where you see one artist with another artist that you would never expect to see. You can discover other things that brand's done in the history that you just never knew about. So I think it's about being able to stand out to people when they're being shouted at to do stuff and buy stuff. The value comes from interesting, real, authentic culture. Yeah. And I think some brands do it well. I think some brands do it absolutely terribly. And it's about really digging deep into the fabric of the brand and understanding what it can and can't get away with. And brands try to get away with too much, I think, and unless you're really honest and true about what the brand is and where it's come from, sometimes it can just completely fall flat. But that's where I think the value for the music fan comes, is something new, something different, something accessible.
Do you think they notice, do you think they're as noticeable as we are about brand partnerships? Do you think fans have kind of clocked on to the value that brands bring, or do they still see it as getting in the way? Because this was discussed in the panel we had yesterday, is Paul Shulver from O2 was talking, and he was like, look, we do a lot of stuff with O2 in music, but the one thing that fans don't want is that brand to get in the way of the experience. You can do anything else around it, take the friction out, do payment, do tickets, but do not get in the way of that experience.
Yeah, I think...
Is that where brands can sometimes fall down? I mean, we'll come on to that, but
I think we notice when it's good and it's bad. I think they don't care when it's bad. It's just burnt money. You might as well burn cash as both brand. Well, just as the brand, actually. No one else is burning cash. But I think the music fan, if it doesn't resonate and it doesn't connect, it just becomes more static. And the brand loses out. And I think if it's done really badly, like I think there was a phone and London Grammar thing a couple of years ago, that was just, it didn't not feel right for either, and I think they were hit by that a little bit for a short period. But I think for us it's really noticeable when it's bad, but that's because we're in it and we live it. For the average music fan, it just passes by, just like the rest of the baby photos that they see.
I think it comes back to that authenticity thing that we've sort of been mentioning. It has to be the right fit. If it's not, it doesn't work, and that's your recipe for an unsuccessful brand partnership. Absolutely. It's never going to work. Like, you're not going to have, I don't know, Morrissey doing a McDonald's brand partnership. Like, even if you throw millions of pounds at it, it doesn't matter, because ultimately the consumer's not going to buy it. I mean, that would never happen in, I don't know what universe that would happen in, but that's a completely ridiculous example, but it needs to be authentic, it needs to be true, otherwise it just won't work.
Yeah. Do you think, to be honest, artists' mindset of what a brand is and what a brand can do has changed over the last few years? Or is it still driven by financial?
Hugely.
Yeah.
I think hugely. I think the last 5 years, you know, we've on our catalogue we've got some very cool, great artists, and for us when we're doing any sync deals or anything that kind of starts to straddle into brand partnerships, like all of them, they have to be that right marriage and that right match. Otherwise, there can be a real disconnect. Yeah, they're much better at doing things, and I think going back to that last point, I think at its worst match, I think the music fan, the true music fan of that band, will probably get slightly turned off if it just doesn't seem like the right fit at all. And you know, there's been the odd partnership over the last few years that you could watch them on TV, watch them on an ad. Your band's in the advert with something, and you've kind of gone, wow. You know, I mean, obviously, I'm in a position where I kind of live it and breathe it, but you know, with sort of family members who I think still not really sure what I do for a living, 17 years on.
No, I'm going to get
sitting there going, oh my gosh, you know, that just seems like such a bad match, you know.
Yeah. I think people are getting smarter because it is everywhere, and what we don't want to do, I think, as an industry is just treat it as another form of above the line where it just becomes like wallpaper and most of it gets missed. And I think as artists' mindset change, so do managers and agents really. So this kind of segues on to the next part, which is why are artists choosing this part to invest money in? And we did some research at FRUKT 2 years ago. Which was around the value exchange of why brands and artists are working together. And a quarter of artists and managers actually said working with a brand, aligning with a brand is either essential or a necessity to extend the career development of their artist. So that is surely starting a signal of change that actually it does go beyond just the money. But, you know, asking the question as to why, Sergio, I'd like to know, what is it brands that offer artists that's unique? What is different to sport? What is different to going into film and TV? Like, what can music really, truly offer that's unique? That's a big question, I know.
I mean, I think scale is a big thing. It's interesting, I was looking at all the Mercury nominees last night, and Stormzy has sold, I think as of last week, 209,000 albums, which, when you consider the scale that he actually operates at, is actually quite a relatively low figure. And actually, we sometimes get asked by, you know, brands, how big is Grime or how big is someone like Stormzy? And the reality is, it's not those 209,000 albums; it's the 12 million kids that engage with his content and so on. And that's where the attraction is for brands, is to get sort of inside that conversation. But I mean, I've worked with particularly urban acts. Forgive that expression, but that's the only one I can think of. For many years, I worked with Tiny Temper for 8 years. And those, particularly artists like him, feel they need to be seen to be working in this space with the right partners. It's a badge of honor. It's something that their fans really relate to. Okay, he's a very sort of stylish artist, and so he's kind of wearing the latest threads and carrying the latest handset and so on. So he's a very good sort of advocate for products. But it's just seamlessly part of his world, part of his economy, and he, you know, people like that shouldn't have to make any apology for that. Really, they're just extracting value from who they are as a sort of role model, as a style figure, and so on. So I think it's when you get into other genres where it becomes a little bit more marginal, and you have to kind of think a bit more carefully, and maybe the activity has to be less showy and have a bit more sort of culture and a bit more creative integrity about it, perhaps.
Yeah, I think, you know, integrity and authenticity is key, but actually on that point, we have to be careful that brands aren't seen to be jumping on a cultural trend at the minute, you know, because grime at the minute is blowing up, and what brands don't want to do is just be seen to jump on that, and in the next cycle they jump on something else, and actually there's no kind of longevity in it. And I think, Miranda, how important is having the right cultural fit? How important is it that brands have to go through the right process, the right music filter to make sure they're working with the right artist in the right area?
Well, I think it's absolutely key. Again, it's about that. It's not going to be an authentic transmission to the public if it doesn't make any sense. I mean, when writers come in for meetings and we talk about new music that they've got, one of the questions we ask them is, what brands do you like? What brands don't you like? I mean, for me, it helps direct who I contact, because we do that. We go out and speak to brands and play them new music and that sort of thing. if it doesn't work, then we won't contact them. Like if they say, oh, we're not into leather or whatever, we obviously wouldn't do that, because you can't push two opposing forces together, because they won't be able to work together. What they actually come out with creatively won't make any sense. So yeah, I mean, cultural fit, or in other words, you know, how a brand's outlook, product mirrors that of the artist is, I think it's probably tantamount to, I mean, it's what will make a brand partnership live or die. Like without it, you've got nothing.
Serge, how do you find that when you're trying to match up, you know, doing sync deals and stuff? How much do you take? Do you look at the holistic, looking around all of it and start matching it up? Do you drive that, or do you take recommendations? What's your kind of process for doing that?
No, we do tend to look at that. We've got one of our writers at the moment who, again, when I started with my kind of video game background, you know, I was kind of like, right, meet the writers, meet the artists, you know, see who's interested in doing any of this stuff. So I had various meetings with some of our writers, and turned out one in particular, Alan, wanted to score a game. And actually, I think when you're an artist, a writer, composer, and you're scoring a game, by default, there's a brand partnership there, because your work is then becoming the sound of that, in this case, a new IP, and an IP that the developer and the publisher are hoping will become one of these big esports titles. So all of a sudden now for him, he's actually scoring it in a very different way to what he releases, his artist name, and that for him was the thing that was really attractive. This will give me an opportunity to actually start making music in a different area to what I release, and actually creating Alan, the composer, as opposed to, you know, the artist's name. So with that, it's been great, and we're working on some other stuff where the entire content of the product will just be our catalogue, and in that by default then there's a brand partnership with us at Ninja Tune, and so yeah, we do look very carefully at all of this.
How different is, you know, when you're licensing music for games and looking at the gaming world, because some of those are brands in their own right, how does that differ from doing sync deals with a kind of a more traditional brand, like an apparel brand, for example?
Well, from my experience, having been sort of on the inside, copyright side, records publishing, and also as a supervisor, and then being on the brand side, where I was for a great many years, most artists, writers, you know, they're touring, they're on that, they kind of like the whole video game arena, because, you know, if they're on tour, some of them are playing anyway. I think a lot of the composers at the top of their game, I mean, you know, over the last 17 years, you know, I'd heard on the grapevine that various people were into scoring games. Ennio Morricone, when I was at places, right, we've got to find something. I'd love to work with Ennio, you know. And I think for a lot of these guys at the top of their game, you know, they've done film, they've done live performances, you know, this is an audience, a locked-in audience. You know, when you're playing a game, you've chosen to play that game, as opposed to, you know, lots of advertising where it's on in the background. You know, if you're online, you click it through, or if you're on TV, you kind of maybe you know, with all the technology we've got now to be able to kind of fast forward, these are locked in. So one, that's it. It's like, wow, you know, I remember at PlayStation, I always used to go and see the labels and the publishers and say, look, this is PS2 days, then PS3. It's like, look, think of this as a radio. Think of me as your radio plugger. We've got, with PS2, it was like tens of millions of listeners out there that are actively listening to the products that we're putting out, that have got your music on. And then, of course, for the composer side, you know, you've got the interactive engines dictating what the stems are being triggered in the score, depending on what the player's doing. So for a composer or an artist or writer, you're writing a piece of music without a beginning, middle, and an end, which then is another challenge. So that, you know, there are so many touch points, I think, that are very attractive.
We did, for Budweiser a couple of years ago, we did the Bud Live tour, which is basically we took we did 7 gigs from the UK, so it's from Scotland down to Southampton, I think, it ended up in, and we had a big bud bus which all the artists basically lived on for 2 or 3 days, and we had FRUKT and Conan in Southampton, and they wouldn't get off the bus because they were just playing FIFA. Like, the tour was done. Like, everyone wanted to go home to bed. They was like, no, we're going to just stay on here and play FIFA all night. So I just had to sit with them and chill, which wasn't the worst. I mean, I'm moaning, that's not really, it wasn't bad. And there was endless Budweiser, which helps.
Just to build on that point about experimentation, I think that's actually something that brands, when they get it right and the brief's right, they can give to probably more established artists who are known for something. A brand can come and say, look, we want you to do something a bit different. We want you to really help co-write this brief. What haven't you done before but you've always wanted? We're going to fund that. We're going to fund a video like you've never shot it before. And the classic examples are like, the OK Go videos, brands, car brands fund that. And they're like, we've got this mental idea that we're going to play the track by driving around and hitting stuff. And they made it, and they did it, and it went everywhere, and Honda's is another example. But more recently, Calvin Klein, Raf Simons, and the XX. The XX didn't need the brand partnership. They wanted to do something different. They wanted to make fashion and culture as well as the music. I think that's another way to look at how you can work together with brands is not, how can I just get my music out there? It's what more can I do that I don't do in my day-to-day.
Yeah, and on the funding side of that, which is really critical, because a lot of the work we do is offsetting costs for creative projects, and actually I mentioned Gorillas earlier, that whole project wouldn't be able to survive without investment that we've had from brands. Deutsche Telekom funded the Gorillas app and helped us fund the creation of the animation architecture for the 4 characters. It's all really expensive stuff. And of course, technology's caught up with Gorillas. They were sort of super pioneering 15 years ago and ahead of their time, really. And for us to keep them sort of relevant and pushing boundaries, it had to be about brands this time. And I think all told, maybe 6 brand deals across this album. You wouldn't notice necessarily. They're not horribly invasive or anything. They're very sort of collaborative and quite seamless, really. But a lot of things you're seeing, a lot of the animation and stuff, we couldn't have done. And we need to be agile with them as well. So we need to sort of stockpile content, which normally with animation takes a long time and, as I say, is really expensive.
And I think also when brands get involved, adds another layer of creativity. And just in terms of personnel, because the brands have great people that work for them. Yeah. Agencies obviously do, and we're going to say that, but agencies have good people that work for them. And the more creative people you can get in the room, the ideas are better. Something I wanted to ask you actually, Alec, how important is a long-term music strategy for brands? Because we've all seen brands come in and out of the music space for maybe 2 years, 18 months, 2 years. And the research that we've just done, which again is on FRUKT's website, shows that fans know when brands come in and when they drop off, and they don't appreciate it. So how important is it to have a proper, solid, long-term music strategy for brands?
It's absolutely critical. Absolutely critical. Like, consistency is king, right? And doing. You can be experimental, you can try new things, you can dip in and out of different projects, but having a point of view on music is the first and foremost thing. Like, what do we believe in music? What do we believe it adds to the world? What isn't right about it? What can be fixed? What can we help with? All of that, like, coming to a really clear point of view, and then you stick to that point of view. For Jack Daniels, I'm sure everybody in the room knows about how long Jack Daniels has been operating in music. But obviously tastes change, culture change, technology changes. It's something that has to adapt and grow. But the same ethics and the same ethos and the principles that we do music by has been the same throughout. And the same with Smirnoff. We did the Night Life Exchange project, we did Battle of the Clubs, we did loads of stuff for them. And then a case in point, they were like, we think music's too marginal, we want to be about other stuff for a bit. And now they're back there again. They're not a client anymore, by the way. Now they're back there again, and because I think they realised exactly that you can't just, once you're in it and people know it, you don't just think, oh yeah, they do stuff in music, but they create culture and they make stuff that I want and I want to buy tickets to, not just get free tickets and then decide not to go at 6 p.m. Like, I want to buy tickets to go to that experience because I know it's going to be amazing. Once you get to that point, you can't. You've got to be consistent. You've got to keep it rolling. And actually, if anything, all you would do if you wanted to do other stuff is evolve it out of music to other culture, like music, fashion, music, art, music, sport. But you've got to have that anchor in the thing that people have come along that journey with. So yeah, you've got to be consistent. You can't dip in and out. You can't change your mind. You can't really change genres unless you're doing it with something consistent in mind. I mean, your research is absolutely correct. People notice it and they'll disconnect next time you come back.
Do you think is that one of the big things that could bring it all down, bring your brand partnerships down and kind of start putting a negative spin on it? Is it not having a role to play? Is it moving around? You know, what do you see as being a negative in the future for us?
I see, I mean, since you mentioned brands that dip in and dip out, because they're not committed, they often don't see it through properly.
That's it.
And there are, particularly in tech actually, there's a lot of launch type brand partnerships, and it's very tactical, and what you tend to get is a lot of fire and excitement at the beginning, but then because the brand isn't committed in the long term to music, they don't see it through, and they lose the opportunity to create resonance, which music, particularly in sync actually, you know, great sync resonates forever. Like I think we all, probably everyone in this room remembers a piece of music from an ad from 20 years ago probably, so when you get it right, it resonates, and those tactical plays in music are often just a bit fleeting, and they just don't follow through properly. Particularly, there's a terrible habit that I witness too often, which is brands who come in with an idea that's quite worthy, and it's even causal, like based in some kind of cause to maybe inspire young people to make the most of creative industries or whatever, and they come at it like that, and that's the sort of pitch, but it's actually masking that beneath that, all they're looking for is attribution, is basically exposure, is ultimately it's advertising, skinned in something that's quite worthy. But because they're only in it for the short term and for the wrong reasons fundamentally, that skin just falls off ultimately. And I think real fans of artists can see that because they're not committed. By the time you get to the end of the sort of project, the sort of punchline that was supposed to be really meaningful is just gone. It's just not there, and all you're left is the brand, and you know, brand managers are looking for very traditional KPIs like the logo and the product in full view constantly, and actually forgetting that actually if they did something magic, they'd get the halo effect, they'd get the association. And
I think also terms like ROI and integrated are probably heard as much as a soy latte in our office now. It's just something that people have to start thinking about is you know, how do we measure it and what does it mean? I think jumping onto the last bit, if future-proofing, is that the answer to future-proofing, you know, our industry and brand partnerships? Is it making sure that it's well thought out and not falling down? Let's open up to anyone, by the way.
I think what you would, just to go back to what Bob was saying about brands, actually, some of them at their core, it is about exposure. And from a sync perspective, we find that that's where brand partnerships for us fall down. Because if they're not committed for the bigger picture, then that doesn't translate in, sorry to be gaudy, but financials. And obviously we need to ensure that our writers are being fairly remunerated for an association with the brand. And yes, there's a creative outlet and a promotional outlet, that's great. But without that financial, it doesn't complete the picture. And I find that with brands that are just about that promotion, they don't complete that. Whereas if it's the people who are more committed and they want that additional activation, then they're the ones that we work really well with and we can communicate with and our writers want to work with.
It's one of the most inconsistent, inauthentic things that I hear. I mean, I do think there's always discussions to be had about of the three things that matter to you, like what takes precedence based upon who the artist is and what their passion is, and I think there's always a conversation. One of the most inconsistent, inauthentic things I hear are brands that don't want to pay because they can give them exposure, but you're using the artist, you're leveraging their creativity, their mind, their hard work over years and years and years. You don't think that they should be paid at all because you're this brand that can expose them. I think
it needs to be a two-way street.
It has to be a two-way street, and I do think that those are the ones that fall down because you know the brand isn't committed, and the artist won't give it all. They won't believe in the project. They won't advocate the project. It has to be a shared dialogue. Absolutely.
I'd say it's also our duty, looking after artists, to make damn sure they're committed. In truth, because that's the other thing that can fall down is
yes, it is.
If the artist, when an artist has a really meaningful connection with the piece of activity, it's just tenfold better. And particularly if you're doing something that's genuinely creative. And you know, I did a a design collaboration with one of our female artists, and she pitched up at the meeting with like a scrapbook of amazing drawings and stuff, and she was so into it. She was like ravenous for the relationship, and wow, it's, you know, it's the best meeting you'll ever have.
I think that passion is something that we need to harness as an industry and keep on harnessing. And talking of passion, we could sit here and talk all day, but there's like 2 more minutes left, I think, before I get waved off. So is there any burning questions that you guys want to ask before we wrap up?
Yeah, I don't know if this is working. Yeah, there we go. So we know that sales are down. Streaming is, for some of the major artists, has brought back the money coming back from the music. So is the brand partnership the solution to reduced sales and reduced money coming in from the traditional routes?
I don't know. It depends on the briefs that you get. I don't think artists should think that brand partnership money is ever going to be like the steady replacement for sales. I think that would be a dangerous expectation to have. However, obviously, if you reach a point and the interest is there, you make money from it. You make money from it, you get exposure, you sell more, particularly if you get the right bit of creative output. But I don't think necessarily that brand partnerships will ever get to a point where it's replacing.
No, I think what brands can probably help to do is to help look at those revenue problems. So work with platforms that are doing great work that probably need revenue. Work with different areas, maybe in live, for example, and look at how brands can help maybe some people that are struggling or some areas that are struggling and add that rather than just being a sole income stream. Because once you take that pressure as a brand, there's a lot of pressure then placed on you as you become a fundamental part of it. And I think if you're an artist trying to work to a 2 to 3, maybe in sometimes a 12-month contract with a brand, you can't really rely on that as a revenue stream as an artist anyway. So I think that is there's a space to play, but I'd be apprehensive as to
it's part of the mix, definitely. A lot of our acts in the early days, you know, live, going out on the road is the most important thing for them, and because it takes a while for them to recoup, so they're not making money from recorded music for a long time in many cases. So, and actually a lot of acts I've worked with over the years have very pragmatically used any income that we bring in to improve their production on the road, to basically provide tour support for their live setup, and it makes a huge difference for them. And it's so they're not trousering the money and going off to buy watches. I mean, it really, most of our artists are very pragmatic people these days, and their managers. There's more and more smart managers out there, I would say, who are very sensible.
Especially if you're looking at somebody independent, like Chance the Rapper, for example, and you've got these artists who are just being like, well, actually, I can negotiate an artist deal here, brand deal here, go out and do live on my own. It's just that is an interesting area to look at. Well, we'll be around all day, so honestly, come and grab us, grab a coffee, grill us on any more questions, and we'll see you later on. Thanks.